Welcome to KiwaniTalk. We're a public information program put together by people from the Dearborn Kiwanis Club, help from students at Dearborn High School, my alma mater. My name is Gary Gardner, and we're the longest running cable access program in the entire universe. And we're happy to be here, over 1,400 episodes over the past 30 years or so. And today we're talking about a different kind of media. It's something we've all heard about, that some of us know about. I know very little, but we're going to learn a lot about podcasting from James Dickson, who is the host of the James Dickson podcast, right?
Absolutely.
Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me. This is great.
It's great to have you here, you know, and I don't listen to podcasts, sorry. But I guess I do because I listen to stuff that comes back and forth. But,
right.
But you weren't always a podcaster.
No.
Where did you grow up? Where'd you get your start?
I actually grew up around the corner from here. Okay. I grew up in Inkster, and so it's just funny that, you know, living that close to Dearborn, this is my first time inside Dearborn High.
Okay.
And so yeah, with my career since college, I've been a print guy. I've been a writer, and so people would have to kind of meet you at a scene or meet you, you know, through the course of you reporting a story for you to get to know them. You know, I spent about a decade at the Detroit News. And so with this, it's so much different because you're putting your physical face and your physical voice out there. You essentially already are a podcaster.
But with reporting, there's a certain level of curiosity, a certain level of ways of going about getting, you know, first get a lead for the story.
Right.
And so, how did you get your leads at the news, and what did you do with them when you got them? You get on the dial phone or the push button phone?
Oh yeah. You know, I always say if you have your headline, you have your story.
Okay.
Right. So if you have an idea about how the story starts, you have your headline, and then if you have your idea about how the story ends, then you're kind of building a bridge between the beginning and end by putting things in a logical order. But, you know, the stories themselves, like I was a breaking news reporter for 5 years at the Detroit News. And so you're literally looking at the transom, looking at who's publishing what. You don't want to get beat, that kind of thing, trying to be first.
Listen to the police scanner.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the scanner is weird. The scanner is kind of, that became more of a TV station thing.
Yeah.
Probably because you don't want the noise in the newsroom.
Right.
But, you know, we would pay quite a bit of money for the emergency alerts.
Okay.
And so I was one of the reporters there November 30th, 2021, Oxford High School shooting.
Okay, yeah.
You know, and I tell people all the time, the Oxford shooting that day, November 30th, was a slow news day before it was a busy news day.
Right. So that, and then that whole tragedy, that whole sort of thing, unfortunately, the old slogan, if it bleeds, it leads, and,
yeah,
you know, that kind of stuff. So, but there's a bit of a difference between print journalism and the media. What got you, when did you first hear about podcasting? And actually, better than that, what the heck is a podcast for people that are, you know?
You know, you mentioned if it bleeds, it leads. And that's one of the news philosophies I will defend, right? Because in a hospital setting, they would call that triage.
Right.
Right. If something's bleeding, it probably does deserve attention. And news fundamentally is about things news is about departures from the norm, not norms. Right. So that's why you have more stories based in Detroit than you have in Troy, because there's more dirt being done in a big city than in small suburbs, you know?
Okay.
How I learned about podcasting, you know, I'd seen people doing it for years. This guy, Jason Whitlock, is probably, for someone I've only met once, is a mentor, yeah, I would say. I mean, he, you know, and so seeing him and the power of the interactive format, using your face, using your voice.
He was Rush Limbaugh's guy.
Absolutely.
And so that was a broadcast, sort of a podcast. You could pick it up.
Yeah.
But how did?
And I experienced it. So he had a presence with Fox Sports. We're talking like early 2010s, right?
Okay.
And I would experience that as a podcast, where like you have to go to the website and press the play button and that kind of stuff. Not over the air, not broadcast, just, you know, his show online. And so that's all it was. I saw this video. It was probably from, I want to say, late 90s, early 2000s, where Tom Green, in a setup just like this, except it was in his basement, and he had Joe Rogan on there. And you could see the gears shifting and turning in Joe Rogan's head as he realized this, wait a minute. So you guys just shoot this yourself, produce it yourself, you can say whatever you want, you can go as long as you want. And what he saw in the Tom Green podcast, you could call it, is that they were free in a way that you're not allowed to be on TV. You're free from time constraints, you're free from space constraints. So you can, it's your chance to do your thing your way. If you have 5 minutes of content, you go up with that. If you have 5 hours, you go up with that and you let whoever's into it find you.
So there's ways and there's ways, I think, of doing this. One
Right.
is to get your iPhone set up in front of you, push record and take a play and then upload it to some site.
Right.
Or to have a studio with microphones and a control room, or like we're doing here, it's a studio with cameras and those types of things. It's all similar, but it's different.
It's absolutely different. And so with that ability to post yourself, I think that's the biggest difference. Whether you're talking about a video medium, whether you're even talking about print and writing, that young reporter right now, if I was just coming out of college right now, I wouldn't be looking for a newsroom job per se. You think about a guy like Nick Shirley and all that fraud he uncovered in Minnesota, right? This isn't a guy, I don't know his background exactly, but he didn't need to be part of a traditional newsroom to do that. And in fact, very few of these kind of big exposés are coming out of traditional news anymore. They're coming out of the independent truth teller who can spend all day looking for these stories and go on to different daycares, because in that print world, in that traditional news world, they're going to want something out of that day.
Right.
Whereas this guy gets to spend his time however he wants it and is able to actually find the truth, whereas in the news business, a lot of times you're just filling pages.
There's a difference, though, I think, I just sort of thinking about, is that traditional newspaper, you needed to have reporters, you needed to have the lead typeface set and the printing presses and the distribution system. And then when you got to radio, you had to have the radio, the broadcast, the license, the TV, you had to have similar things. But the internet and the technology has changed where you can push stuff up and then it's available for that. That has, how long has that been around? It's developed more and more and more, but that, I think, has been the key to get into this whole new area.
Absolutely. It is the autonomy. It is the rise of the individual creator. And that's why, you don't see as many podcasting firms. You see more individual voices, Maybe it'll be produced by a firm, but, a good personality is what carries a podcast. These things are not decided by committee. And so that's kind of the biggest difference, is not only does it take fewer people to produce a given product, there's fewer people who have to sign off on it for you to even get the resources in the first place. So right now, I think about a Metro Detroit, you could call him an influencer, Father Kavanaugh, who was alive a century ago and got started a century ago on the radio in Metro Detroit. When he ran afoul of the Catholic Church and they, ended his radio reign, today he doesn't need a benefactor and he doesn't need a radio station. He could just get online and upload his own words. So it's such a different world for everybody.
So there's one thing about being able to get online and to upload your stuff, but the next thing is getting people to tune in or push the button, or to find you. How do you do that, and how do you get your product visible and expanded?
And that's where the 2020s become a challenge and almost a detriment, but I view it more as an obstacle, which is, in the reading sense, it's a world where people only read headlines. Very few people actually click into stories. And that's why when you see slanted news, a lot of times they try to push you one way or another in the headline, knowing that that's all 90% of people will read, and that they'll assume that it's true and run with the headline understanding. And so when you offer, ways that the story is more complicated in the 17th paragraph, Well, you know no one's reading to the 17th paragraph.
Right.
Podcasting, same dynamic, where the best way to get you to listen to the whole thing is to give you little breadcrumbs, little clips, little 1 minute things that make you say, okay, I'll risk 15 minutes with this guy.
But how does someone find you in the first place? What is it that gets you from your aunt in Tuscaloosa listening to you,
right,
to the people out in the Fiji Islands saying we got to tune in today because it's the James Dickson podcast going on now?
Absolutely.
How do you get the first person and then expand it to the millionth person?
Yeah, and that's where social media comes in. And so social media is kind of a blend of traditional media plus friendships plus unprecedented scale, right? And so unlike, 50 years ago when you might be limited by where you live and who you know, now you have a chance on social media. My favorite platform is X. You have a chance on social media to meet like-minded people all over the world, as opposed to just hoping that the geographic lottery works out for you here and hoping you have enough of a local following. So even with me, I mostly talk about Michigan politics from a conservative angle. And so there could be people anywhere who listen to it, but as you just kind of brand yourself and make yourself an authority, who typically listens to me is other people from Michigan.
So when I say make politics local again, I hope you understand what I mean. What I mean is, in Michigan, Donald Trump is not the bad guy. The Democrats are. The Democrats are the ones who've ruined your kids' school. They've lowered standards for teachers, and they've made government finances across Michigan, locally, state, everything, less transparent than they were. It's Democrats who burned through a $9 billion surplus in 2023. It's 3 years later at this point. It's 2026. It's an election year where, as I explained, all of Michigan is up for grabs. Have you seen a single Democrat stand up and say, hey, here's what you got for that $9 billion that we spent?
So in some ways that gets really, you can zero in on that. But is that maybe the whole conservative idea has a Michigan appeal, but it also has a statewide and a more of a national sort of thing too?
It does. I mean, especially with Michigan, we're blessed to live in a swing state. In 2024, I was on the New York Post swing state team. And so they had us in all 7 swing states that Trump ended up winning. And the idea was we were going to tell stories that the traditional media in those states wouldn't tell. And so I'm telling stories about Alyssa Slotkin, Mike Rogers' opponent in the Senate race, how she's a fake farmer, how she takes property taxes for farming but does no farming, how the first time she voted in Michigan was in 2018 when she voted for herself. And so because the media in Michigan is so broken and has gotten so biased, normally you would pick up those stories. If you're beat on a story, you have to match that story. But they would ignore these stories after we printed them. And so what we found is there was a whole lot of upside in just telling the truth that the traditional media was avoiding. So us being a swing state draws a lot of national attention.
So you mentioned X, and there's a lot of people that use it, and I dabble, well, not as much as I should for my business, but I do.
Are you following me on X, by the way?
You got me. All right, sorry about that. But when you have the people that start to follow you, that is how you get. But how do you get the people to follow you? You put put something on there that gets people. Then okay, now I want to hear more about this. That's the little breadcrumbs you're talking about that you put out there.
Yeah, I think if you're starting today, if I was starting over today, right, you would follow people that you're interested in, because interested is interesting. And as a guy trying to build a following, or if you're coming from zero, a good way is to chime in on people's things, not just to amplify what they say, but add something. Show people your flavor, and especially if you do it in the responses, because then all the other people reading that tweet will see your tweet in the responses. And so that's a good way, whoever likes it might be like-minded. You follow them, some amount of them will follow you.
So it's not just getting your iPhone out and doing something. You need to get it out there and to to get attention for it, and the X platform really is probably the way that a lot of people can do that. So
Life is a people business.
absolutely.
And so you have to be thinking about, how do I reach the people with this? Because we're not just doing this for ourselves, right? Or our health. And so, yeah, I would interact with people, but I would also say things on my own main timeline that draw you in.
And there you go. Well, we're going to get drawn into this a little bit more, but first we're going to get a break. We're going to take some words from Kiwanis, talk about our club and Kiwanis International and other sort of things. Be back talking about podcasting with James Dickson, the superstar from the James Dickson podcast. Don't go away. Welcome back to KiwaniTalk. I'm your host, Gary Gardner. We're continuing our discussion about the amazing new world and dynamic sort of things can be done in podcasting. And we have James Dickson from the James Dickson podcast. We've been talking about this, so people will say, okay, get to the cut. How do you get a hold of the James Dickson podcast? Where can you find it? What does somebody need to do to tune in to hear the pearls of wisdom?
I'm a Spotify guy. It's how I listen to 95% of music, podcasting, anything. Yeah. But I realize not everyone's on Spotify. And so if I had to recommend it to someone who's not on Spotify at all, I would say go on Substack, jamesdicksonpodcast.substack.com. Substack I like because it's like what Twitter was like 15 years ago, where you're allowed to just say whatever and the algorithm doesn't try to punish you for having a renegade view. So yeah, substack.com, James Dickson podcast at Substack. That's the best way to get it.
Okay, and so if you did a Google search,
right,
for that you would find it at that. And so is there an actual website, or what's the best one? If we had to put it up on the magic screen here in front of us, what would it say?
Yeah, that would be jamesdicksonpodcast.com. So we have a podcast Substack, which I think is helpful because you get to upload video and stuff. But then you have like the placeholder website where people can just find contact information, that kind of thing.
That's the way to get there. Okay.
Right.
So you started this. What was the scariest thing about becoming a podcaster and taking that leap, into that world? Financially. Your wife, hopefully she has a good job, helps support your podcasting habit. So,
yeah, I think the scariest thing is the idea that you're going to throw a party and no one's going to show up. Okay. And you do have to understand, just like when KiwaniTalks was at the beginning of its cycle,
right,
it's going to take time and it's going to take real effort to build an audience, especially when there's a saturated market. Now imagine if everyone on earth tried to have a public access show too, right? And so that's kind of where podcasting is going, where, you have guys who talk about sports, let's say, but then you also have a lot of these former athletes doing their own sports podcasts. So like the people who normally might be your guest on a podcast have their own, which actually might make them more likely to do yours because they promote theirs. And so you have to think about yourself as a member of an ecosystem. And that's actually makes it better. It's the reason you see Lowe's set up shop next to Home Depot, because if you're in the market, you'll probably go to one of the two.
When you are out there getting your ideas for your podcast, and you're on X and you're on the other social media, how much of your ideas come from outside people feeding back to you? How much do you get from newscasts? How much do you get from traditional print media, if any? Where does it come from?
I try to come up with all the ideas myself. Now, like for instance, my next one is going to be about how America needs a second party. Now, I will use clips from things I'm going to talk about, like the governor of Oklahoma was talking about he doesn't believe Democrats imported mass amounts of illegals just to win elections. And so that's the kind of clip I would run and respond to. But the headline, it's really important that you come up with that headline yourself.
Because that just tweaked me and says, I thought there were two parties. There was a Democrat Party and the Republican Party. But are they the uniparty?
Exactly. It's the uniparty. And so my theory is that you go back to FDR. And so there was a 20-year time span where Democrats held the presidency for every minute from 1933 to 1953. And that created a dynamic which the conservative movement was created in response to, right? And so when a Bill Buckley comes around in the 50s and creates National Review and says, we're standing athwart history yelling, stop, when you think about that phrase, that's a phrase of impotence. You're not driving the train, you're just hoping that you saying stop is going to get the actual driver to stop the train. Which, when Democrats have just led the country for 20 years straight, what else could you think? Right? And so we're trying to get out of that framework where you have to be the junior party. It's okay as a Republican to start with a blank page and offer your own version and your own vision of America, not just say no sometimes.
So what makes you conservative as opposed to any other sort of political leaning?
First of all, I think things mean what they say, right? I think there are boys and girls. I think that abortion is murder. I think that also the left, they've gotten to a point where there are no normal Democrats anymore. I grew up when Bill Clinton was president. That's the first one I remember being president. And they went out of their way to give the pretense, at least, of being normal people who are sharing a future with you, right? Remember him talking about Social Security, mend it, don't end it. Talking about abortion, it should be safe, legal, and rare. And now we have Democrats bringing up abortion bans up to the Democrat convention. And so it's become clear to me that the opposition, we're not just arguing about tax rates anymore. We're up against powers and principalities. And the devil comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And so it's beyond conservative. I'm on the side of the angels. The angels just happen to vote with me.
When you have these ideas and you're putting them out there, you're putting your podcast together, and just get into the technical part of it. Work with a script, with bullet points, to work with from the top of your head. How do you go through and do all that?
I will typically use bullet points that kind of just trigger, oh, this is what I wanted to say about that. Because you don't want to get into where you're trying to repeat entire lines, right? That's tough. But sometimes I do find that I drift more toward writing out a more detailed script. So I feel comfortable doing either one. And I was blessed a few times. My friend Justin Barclay, radio host on the west side of the state, when he wasn't available, sometimes he fills in for Glenn Beck and needs someone to fill in for him. Okay. So I've hosted his radio show a few times in the past and learned if you're doing a 3-hour show, you can't write everything out. And so you have to be able to work sometimes from just a trigger word and take one word and give a minute on that word. And just literally, he told me one time, sometimes you just don't have it all written out. The microphone comes on, it's time, and God gives you the words.
And you've got some words on your shirt.
I do.
Make politics local again. We're down to about our last 3 or 4 minutes. What does that mean to James Dickson?
Yeah, make politics local again. This is kind of my rallying cry for the 2026 election. In Michigan especially, I believe that were we to lose this election, we pretty much would lose the state. There's never been a time where Democrats have run Michigan for 16 straight years, and whoever wins this one's going to win the next one. And so were we to have Democrats back to back, we'd be done. And so the media wants to tell you this is a midterm election, which when you hear midterm, I mean, we're at high school right now. When you hear midterm, what it says to the mind is not as important as the final exam. Right? Whereas this is our final exam. And so make politics local again as this is not a Trump-focused midterm that's going to be driven by national narratives, right? ICE and Homeland, no, we're not talking about that stuff. What we're going to talk about is the conditions on the ground in Michigan and specifically who crashed our state into the rocks. And so if we talk Michigan and local issues, we win. If we talk national narratives, we lose.
Where does your podcast go? Where do you see your podcast 5 years from now? Where are you going?
Yeah, this year, my goal is to win the state, is to save the state from ruin. And so Make Politics Local again is also a tour I'm doing, going statewide, talking to Republican groups about our opportunity, trying to give some reframes about how to win it. Past that, I'd like to be a big factor in 2028. We're going to be a swing state again. And 2027, maybe we'll just talk about normal life.
And so the James Dickson podcast gets out there and reaches tens of thousands, millions of people ultimately, hopefully. Is that what the goal is? And how do you monetize that? That's right down at the end here. How do you?
Yeah, you monetize that by asking for help.
Okay.
What I found is that you have not because you ask not. And so you can be doing something for a long time and people don't even know to help you because you never asked. And so I've had to humble myself because I'm crowdfunded. You know, it's normal people who support me and enable me to do this. I have no problem getting a normal job, but for right now, this is my normal job. And so you have to get comfortable talking about money and asking for help because the world runs on money.
So if someone went to the website, the jamesdicksonpodcast.com,
Yes, sir.
they would find information about that, about your crowdsource funding.
Absolutely.
And about
There's a
you.
donation link. There's all these things. Yeah, there's ways to help where, you know, whether I was given $10,000 or $10, I have a plan to make that next dollar play.
And what's the ultimate goal for the number of, I say the word views, but I don't know if that's the right word for podcasting. Where do you want to be?
Ultimately, I want us to be a one-party Republican state. I want us to be dominant. You know, the Bible talks about dominion. It doesn't talk so much about coexistence. And so when I look at the earliest history of the Republican Party, which was created in Michigan, those guys were created in July 1854 and then swept the November election that same year and then led Michigan for decades and decades. Didn't really take a challenge until like the 1910s. That's the kind of dominance we need to save Michigan. We can't just trade the governor's office every 8 years. We have to fix this place or we will lose it.
Sounds like enthusiasm and passion are not shortages in James Dickson's repertoire there.
No, if I don't care about something, I don't care at all.
Right.
But if I do care, I'm all in.
That's good. Well, I think that Michigan, with some input from the James Dickson podcast, the enthusiasm is well on our way, but it's not just us listening. What does it take? Get out there and...
It takes people power. You have to get up. You have to show up. You have to show up in February, in May, in August, and the elections are going to call midterms, and in those non-presidential years, you have to show up throughout the calendar because the left is counting on us not showing up.
Well, I think because of James Dickson, a lot of people are going to be there. So thanks a lot for coming on the program. Appreciate having you here.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for tuning in to KiwaniTalk. And this is all coming down to a lot of things. Voting, being a participant in our democracy, supporting the republic that we have requires all of us to be involved, not just observers, but participants. See you next time on KiwaniTalk. I'm Gary Gardner. Bye-bye.